Wrecker.
Hey, good to see you, man. How are you?
Good. I just saw you the other week. You were actually here in the States. We saw each other in person for the first time in
And can I
like
say
three
you look
years.
you look really good. Like I expected you to be more of a blob and an old person, but you look trim and healthy and really good
Hey,
in
my
shape.
brother.
No,
And you
absolutely.
were
I think.
very, I might say you're handsome as well. So, so, hey, this is what I want to talk about today. Whenever I go to a website, okay, and sometimes if it's a good old American website, I can actually just go to the website. But then every once in a while, I get this thing saying, "Will you accept all cookies?" And that's when I know I'm hitting a European website. And then, of course, I have to say, yeah, accept cookies and go to the website. I give it no thought whatsoever. And this drives
Yeah.
me nuts. They probably put in all these regulations. There's all this expense to, and then I just click yes and go to the website because I know I'm gonna go to the website anyway. And I think there's just so much nonsense with privacy. I think that what we do is we data privacy, right? It's one of the big issues of our time. And we're doing so much and we're having so many conversations about it, but most of what we do is nonsense. And then the real substantial things that need to be addressed, no one's addressing. Right. So that's my personal view. So I figure, all right, we need to talk about this because I think data privacy is one of the issues of our time. So we have our good friend Kirsten Martin. Hi, Kirsten.
Hello.
Hey, Kirsten. Good to see you again.
Good
To
to see
talk
you.
about these things. So can we? So Kirsten, and the thing that gets me. So you have this cool podcast. It's ND Tech here at Notre Dame.
hmm
We have our tech ethics podcast, and we'll link to it. But I've been listening to a few of them, and privacy is something that comes up a lot on your
hmm
podcast. I think there was one by a guy named Ari that
Waldman.
really got me thinking about it, and this whole idea of notice and choice, where you could tell,
hmm
so you can maybe talk about that with us a little bit. But then the thing that really blew me away was this Salome person
hmm
who you had on not so long ago that was talking about data governance. So I
hmm
thought we could talk about those issues and maybe how you see information systems.
Contributing, maybe? How about
Yeah,
contributing to it? Yeah, that would be nice.
because I think this is something maybe we could do as a field,
Right.
inform
Right.
the world a little bit, because I think what's happening out there is it's nonsense. Do you agree with me that this whole European thing, where you have to just click and you pass through anyway, is that kind of like, is there any reason for this? Is this providing value to anybody?
So I think the clicking on the notice is not only a European thing. I mean, in some ways, I mean, they just have it so that there's like an opt-in where you actually click affirmatively that you want to join. But the same argument around whether or not adequate notice and then that we consent by going on the website is still like the major regime within the United States as well. Like we kind of originated it because we like in the United States, we like the idea of giving consumers choice. I'm just putting that in air quotes, even though we're on a podcast. And that way, like that's the market focus that we have in the United States. And so I agree with you. And I think a lot of privacy scholars do agree that the regime of whether or not something's in a privacy notice and that we then quote consent to it is adequate to address our privacy concerns is a fallacy, and in some ways has been a huge distraction to the companies because we told them that. I mean, in all fairness to companies, the FTC and the US regulators and European regulators said notice and choice is how we address this. Companies then did it by creating these crazy notices. We don't think about it, we just click through. And now we're upset because we're like, oh, wait, our privacy expectations aren't being met at all. I mean, I'm not giving them a pass, but we didn't tell them anything different. I mean, scholars have, but it's not like regulators have told them anything different. But I agree that notice is not enough.
Well, so wait a second. Let's dissect this a little bit. I think there's multiple layers here. Yeah. So
Mm-hmm.
there is the issue of privacy and whether or not we need to be giving our opt-in concern about every single cookie. Yeah, that's one level.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is to sort of how it's being implemented. Is that an effective way of doing that? Yeah, because I
Mm-hmm.
always think whenever I see one of these web pages, I think, hey, this is a perfect case study in digital nudges. How do I
Mm-hmm.
make
Mm-hmm.
people, without taking their opt-in choice away, how do I still get them to do what I want them to do? By
Right.
graying out the fields and making it really complicated to not
Right.
simply click accept. Anyway, so that's the second layer. I guess the third layer is, how and why do governments make these decisions anyway? And I guess the fourth layer is, well, to what extent is that even informed? and informed well, that's a different question, by, by the scholarly conversation around these topics. Yeah, because on some level, it's a little bit what Nick said a couple of episodes ago about principle. I guess in principle, we all agree it's a nice idea. It's a good thing that we make our own choice about our privacy, right? On that level, everyone say like, yeah, sure, I want to make my own choices to what extent I consider my information private or not. But the devil is, of course, in the detail. And I feel like there's all these different layers about what are we producing that informs privacy mechanisms? What's the regulation saying? What are firms actually doing? And then fourth, what are people actually doing? And is that meeting any sort of demand or requirements or anything like that? So maybe we can dissect it a little bit.
Right. So I think what's helpful is to think, well, I mean, we should probably talk about what privacy is. So one of, Nick mentioned Ari Waldman's book, and one of the funnier pieces of this book is he goes into these companies and he asks these privacy experts, like the folks in the general counsel's office, the people that do design. And at one point he says, well, what is privacy? And they're like, oh, everybody knows what that is. And they just kind of like move on, and it's kind of like, well, no, I mean, like, well, how is it? What is it to you? Like, what's your definition of privacy that you operationalize on a regular basis? And so I think one thing is to think about privacy is that we have norms or expectations or rules about how our data is gathered, shared and used. So in a given context. So we go to the doctor's office, we have expectations about how our data is gathered, shared and used. We go to school, gathered, shared, and used. When you and Nick are talking, you have expectations about what information you give to Nick, how he's going to use that information, and who he might share it with, right? So it's not just that we hand off information and that's the privacy decision that we make. The privacy decision, we never give up our privacy when we share our data. There's always a terms of use. You can think of it like a little asterisk next to the data as to how we expect it to be shared and used. And so the notices, in fairness, was the idea behind it, as you say, in principle, would be that companies would explain how the data is being shared and used, and maybe aggregated, what data is being inferred about us, what other trackers are on their site. And so in principle, that would be a great idea. And I always say companies can be really clear when they want to be. So 10Ks are really complicated things, annual reports, and they explain everything about a company, not just their privacy policies and their data governance policies. They're really clear, like you really know the risks. They're very clear about, in conference calls, they'll explain exactly what their suppliers are and what they're doing with everything. So I think if companies want to be really clear, for example, just listing out the trackers that they allow on their sites, that'd be easy. They could say on the front page, these are the 30 trackers and who owns those trackers and how the data is being used and gathered. The key is that companies don't do that. So they're not substantive in their notices. They don't explain at all how their data is being used, and it's really hard to find out. So they're obscure on purpose. To your point, they're obscure in the notice, and then they have what we sometimes call nudges or dark patterns as to how they want you to share your data. Yeah. But just sharing it doesn't mean that it's anything goes. Like there's expectations about how that data is going to be used.
I mean, on the one hand, I agree, right? So it's designed for obscurity. That's what I call the nudging or the dark pattern, whatever, right? So they clearly have an interest in you behaving a certain way, but of course, it's freedom of choice. I'm not so sure about they don't even want to share. I mean, I recently, I don't know whether I can still find it, but I recently saw a comparison of the terms and conditions of use of a variety of the biggest sort of online platforms. And they would range anything from like 20 pages to something like 80, 90, 100 pages if you were to print them out. They're ridiculously long. So I think there's quite a lot of detail in there, and some of them are actually providing a lot of detail or just a lot of blah. But in any case, it sort of defeats the purpose. No one's going to read that. I mean, I'm not going to read 100 pages of terms and conditions before I click to see whether at some stage some of the content on that webpage may or may not be relevant to me. It's like what Nick said, like, if I visit a webpage, I probably already made up my mind that I want to go there and check out the content.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's been studies. Lori Craner is at Carnegie Mellon, and she with Felicia McDonald, like back in 2006, did an economic analysis and said that you'd lose 6 years off your life if you, not that you would die earlier, but it would take 6 years just to read all the privacy policies and like that you would ever run across. And so the idea that this is like nonsensical for consumers has been known for forever. I mean, even I did a study about notices where I found that when people read a real notice, so I went to an expert on notices, which if you're in the privacy scholars world, you find people that do very obscure things. So I went to an expert on notices and said, what's the worst notice that you could like drive a Mack truck through for a privacy notice? And she said Fandango. And so I took the Fandango privacy notice and I took out the word Fandango and just said this website. And I asked people to read it. And then I asked people what kind of data uses and sharing they thought was in it. And it turns out they just assumed that their privacy expectations were in the notice, that by having a notice, people just trust companies to actually meet their privacy expectations. Otherwise, why would you have a notice? It's so long. It's like 90 pages long.
Well,
they must be meeting my privacy expectations.
What you just said is I think the number one problem with all our discussions about privacy. I think paternalistic professors in our little elitist thrones think we need to, and others need to think we need to do something about privacy. Yet,
sorry.
Well, but look at, because these corporations are, exploitative, and they extract data and then they monetize that data. So there must be something bad happening there. Yet Cambridge Analytica and Facebook happened how many years ago? And I just Googled over 220 million Americans are on Facebook. Unless your head is in the sand, at least half of those people have to know Facebook is taking their data, they're selling it, right? My old postdoc, Tawfiq Elashor, his PhD was on the privacy paradox, which is people say they care about privacy, but actually they don't. They don't care. Nobody cares. They'll just click through the pages. So it's like we're right. That's why I say paternalistic. We're doing it for people's own good, because they don't know how badly they're exploited and how badly they're mistreated and how bad, right? So why do we even, and I'm being a little facetious here, but why do we even worry about privacy? Why don't we just let people do whatever the heck they're going to do? And if they put data somewhere, they know everyone's taking it. They know it's being exploited. They know they're being fed ads and targeted based on behaviors and demographics. What's the problem?
So I think one interesting thing, I think the talking point of the privacy paradox is one that you hear from companies all the time. That's like kind of the standard trope that they trot out. And if you look at the studies that, in air quotes, prove the privacy paradox, they're kind of funny. They're studies like, someone will ask, like, do you care about privacy? And then someone in a survey says, yes, I care about privacy. On a scale of 1 to 5, it's a 5. Do you go on Amazon? Yes. Oh, it's paradoxical. That just proved the privacy paradox.
Tawfiq gets you to share your healthcare data.
But see, right? but people trust researchers. That's not even a fair comparison. So in order to conduct research, we have to go to an IRB and then have a notice of consent, and like literally a notice that says, this is how I'm going to protect your data. And so researchers, and I've done studies where I show people are more than willing to actually give data to a researcher because we trust researchers and the academic institution.
China, we know TikTok is recording and keeping every single TikTok video of every teenage girl in America. Can I just stay on one?
It seems as though as soon as I get to one of your points and start to combat it, you move on to another one. And then okay.
Kirsten, this is the same point. I don't need Tawfiq's experiment to show the privacy paradox. I could show TikTok. I could show Facebook. People don't give a crap. That's my whole point. Right. I don't know whether they share it with researchers or not. The world shows us that people don't care.
Yes, that people. Right. So the idea is that by being online, people are demonstrating that they don't care about how their data is being shared and used. And I don't think that people realized when they were on Facebook in general that 60% of all the people that join hate groups on Facebook was by Facebook's own recommendations. Right. Like just based on what they know about you, they are feeding you recommendations to join hate groups, and then they're kind of manipulating you into joining them. Now, you could say that people should have known that, and that if they went to like my conferences, then they should have known that absolutely was going on. Or if they read specific people in the Washington Post that was outing that even before the Facebook papers, they should have known that. But the vast majority of people don't know that. Like they don't understand how the recommendation algorithm works. They don't understand that Facebook doesn't ever sell data. They actually just sell access to data. And so they don't understand when Facebook claims, I never sell your data, they're telling the truth. They don't sell their data, but they do sell access to the data so that people can target them and manipulate them. So I'm not convinced when you ask people, like someone else, a guy named Chris Hufnagel, who's at Berkeley, did a study that showed that if you educate people as to what actually the data flows are online. So just general data flows and how it works, that people actually do have higher levels of privacy concerns. The question that you're pointing out is like, do they have any choices in the matter? Like, so are there enough choices where you have a good TikTok and a bad TikTok, or Facebook versus something else? And that, I think, well, the regulators are looking into that right now. Like, are there enough choices in the marketplace of networks, social networks, that people can actually choose a more privacy protective option?
So wait, you two guys are running off full steam. I want to pause a little bit because I think that there were a couple of interesting points here. So first of all, about the paradox, right? I think there is one thing that's called the paradox, capital P, if you want. As a European, I do think there's a lot of very paradoxical behaviors. I'm not sure this is the privacy paradox, but like in Germany has some of the toughest, I believe, I'm led to believe, toughest data privacy laws and so forth. And if you go and ask anyone in the street, a lot of them are very concerned about, what information the government gets from them. And what they do with this, and whether or not your doctor is ever allowed to request information about your health situation from some other doctor. So on that level, there is this privacy concern, you could call it this. On the other hand, everyone just freely goes to Google and Amazon and any other tech player that you might think of, and happily clicks away all the privacy notices. So that to me is very paradoxical. So on that national level, you would say that's a country, that's a population very concerned with privacy, but only in certain things. So sort of, there might be a deep instilled fear of the government, what they might do to us. On the other hand, they're completely whimsy and don't do anything about it, right? So I do think there are some paradoxical behaviors. And what I meant to say with this is sort of, well, maybe we have to move away from this black and white. There is the privacy paradox. It's always the same. Maybe it's with regards to, well, privacy to whom? Do we trust the government? Do we trust the researcher? Do we trust Amazon, Facebook, and Google? Yeah. So that's one point I want to make. The other one, you said a little bit, well, maybe we can help with re-education. And that got me thinking that, the Cambridge Analytica case, or more recently that a Netflix documentary about social network and how the YouTube algorithm works and that sort of stuff. Well, that really got the word spread, didn't it? I mean, a lot of people watched the documentary, and a lot of people listened to the podcast with Joe Rogan, for example. So you would think, well, okay, wonderful, that problem is going to go away because we're now more educated. Is it as simple as that? That people are getting a little bit more sensitive, like with the TikTok example. I think everyone sort of familiar with IT kind of knows it. I doubt my parents would know it.
Right.
But by and large, some people would know more and more and more. But okay, maybe we need a little bit more information about what Instagram does and what TikTok does and so forth. But by and large, it sounds a little bit like, well, we don't have to do more. We have to get a bunch of Netflix documentaries. That's apparently a very good education instrument. And then all the privacy concerns will go away because apparently it's all lack of awareness and lack of education.
It could be. I mean, I think it's interesting that your parents wouldn't know about it. Like you're assuming that. Like I think there are differences in pockets of information. I would also hazard a guess, if we were to go back in time, there would be an environmental paradox and a car safety paradox that people would be talking about, and that the industry would claim things like, perhaps there's no way that we could actually put safety in our cars. First of all, it's not our job. It's your job to just drive better. Seatbelts are stupid. And they cost a lot of money. And so many of us would go out of business. They actually said this, GM. And it's bad for us. It's bad for the United States for us to then kind of lose business by firing people because these seatbelts are so damn expensive. And if people really cared about safety, don't you think they would have just picked a different car? I mean, there are other cars. You don't have to actually use my car. And so why are you clamoring at us to put in safety features? I mean, that was the argument, and then when it came to environmental, you guys are always complaining about environmental issues back in the 70s and 80s. No one really cares. Look, everyone still lives in Pittsburgh. They could move if they really cared. And so they clearly don't care. And so, and those miners in West Virginia, they care. They say, everyone says, why are you being so paternalistic about those miner safeties? I mean, they don't care. They're going down there. They could not go. It's a free market. They could go other places. So I think this idea of people acting paradoxically is something that companies in the moment have to argue, right? Like they have to argue that. And I always say that it's okay. They can argue it, but it doesn't mean that we just sit back and take that argument. We just say, okay, fair enough. I hear what you're saying, but we need to start thinking through, how can we do this better? There's normally a a time when there's big growth in an industry where we are hands off. And I don't think that's a bad thing. Like, we're not trying to meddle before it settled in, or we're trying to figure things out. But that doesn't mean that we just don't get in there and kind of say, how can we tweak this so that it's a little bit better for the people, for example, who are never going to follow what Netflix or Cambridge Analytica did. And it's beyond them to understand it. And really, it's this guy, Alessandro Acquisti, he's at Carnegie Mellon as well. He's a privacy economist, and he calls it responsibilization, which is actually a European term, which is when you put too much responsibility on individuals to kind of negotiate with these big companies as to what they really want, when they're not in the position to know or to argue. And so in some ways, it's similar to car safety and saying to the one driver, like, well, you just go argue with Ford and get them to put in safety, and Ford says, no, there's 100 million people that don't want that. They just want my Ford Pinto, which is perfectly safe.
So let me, and we're not going to have enough time on today's podcast, but let me give you so I like what you said. And one of the interesting things that you said in one of your podcasts with that Salome person, you said something like, the old guys who are travelers and they're consultants and they're doing the facial recognition and airports, whatever. Like, so for me, I don't really care. You can take my face. My face is actually online. And it's because you're kind of, I guess, high status individual. So the high status individuals that are comfortable, educated, maybe their privacy concerns are certainly different, but what ends up happening is those same technologies. So those of us who may be educated don't actually care, but then those who are maybe less educated should care because they can be maybe exploited in a way. So I think there is something there, but I think the really interesting part of this is that it's all about notification and choice, as if people can make decisions and transactional decisions, as if, you and I were getting together. I tell you, okay, whatever I'm about to tell you, you can post or not. Right. But it's not transactions that we're part of. It's these relationships over time. Right. So it's like being in a relationship with someone who's with a friend like Wrecker. If Wrecker and I are buddies and we're off the podcast and I tell him a couple personal things about myself, and then I find out he's telling people he's this gossip, right? It was kind of implied that I would expect some responsible partnership from him, but it's not there. Now, how do I know that? How do I know Facebook? How do I know TikTok? How do I know what they're doing? And this is kind of where I think, and this is what I got from your podcast with Salome, is that's where IS research can really help. I think is that it's not about notification and choice. It's not about privacy decisions. And, I'm not a scholar in this area.
Yeah. No, I think you're right.
But it's not about that transactional, right? These platforms have relationships with us. It's about a relational, persistent, over time interface that enables people to continually be updated in a way that's meaningful to them, not that's meaningful to the government, not that is meaningful to me in my TikTok use, that will show me in the language and the visualization and how exactly is my TikTok, who's seeing my TikTok, how are they using my data, all of this. There's got to be some way to feed that back to me without this, and it's a design, it's a human behavior.
That was one of the questions that I wanted to ask, because it sounds a little bit, especially when we talked about the privacy notice, I was thinking at some stage, well, doesn't it just mean it's poor design? Should we just get a bunch of HCI designers to do a little bit more research on how to do this more effectively? And what Nick just proposed the same way, like, can we have a more relational design? They can customize and personalize all their offerings. Why can't they customize, personalize, and make it more relational what they do with my data, right? That's just a question of good interface or good platform design, right? So is it just poor design? It sounds a little bit too simple.
Yeah. So I will say that folks within HCI and just computer science in general, and I'm just going to point to Carnegie Mellon again, because they've done a ton of this work around making notices better, has been going on, sorry to say, outside of business schools for years. And so I think, and I think that still is important work, because there is a certain amount that notices can be useful, both for like very, very savvy consumers, but also like reporters, tech reporters that are trying to figure out things that are going on, regulators that are trying to, communicating through a notice to multiple parties at the same time, to your investors at the same time. So I'm not saying that notices need to go away, but the focus on notices, I think, has what Nick was saying was like, we see this by focusing on notices. We've been focused on this to hand off our transaction that really doesn't encompass, to Salome's point, everything that's going around about how we care about data and how it's being used. And so she makes a great push of saying, look, we look at this as either this notification, enough notice, and then we consent, and that's a dignity thing that we do to make sure that people are autonomous and legitimate in the marketplace. Or we tend to focus on like, I'll pay you $1 for your data, this property idea, which doesn't really go anywhere, but it still focuses on this handoff. And she kind of says, look, you can make that better, but there's a lot more going on behind the scenes. Like Nick was saying, with both like, how does a platform need to govern the data that's flowing through it between Nick and you, between Nick and like a ton of other people, that's respectful or kind of maintains the relationships that the platform is and Salome talks about more than just platforms, but focusing on data governance allows us to say the data is used around relationships. And so we need to talk about more than just this simple handoff, but more about how the data is being used and protected within relationships, whether that's between a person and a company, whether it's between two different people, between many, many people within a community. And I think that's her kind of move, it's to say, that's fine, make the privacy handoff a little better. Like, I'm not diminishing that work, but that's not all that's going on. There's a lot more going on behind the scenes. And I agree with Nick in that, and this is where IS research can do a lot, is to say, like, what are the types of relationships that need to be occurring, and how can we have governance decisions? Governance, not in public policy. I don't mean that. I mean a platform governance policy.
Exactly.
So platform governance is kind of where the action is at. And IS researchers talk about platforms all the time. And and we have economic and sociological theories about platforms. And so if we think about like, so how should we have governance policies around the data on this platform, whatever the platform is completely within the realm of IS. You know what I mean? Like that's solidly it's just right within the footprint of where IS should be. Because the other thing that IS scholars would be able to speak to is like the normal concerns of a firm. So I'm a firm and a platform. And so I have my normal firm questions that I have, like, I have to act in the long-term interest of the firm. I have to have a business rule as to why I'm doing this. I have stakeholders, I have stockholders, I have all these other people I need to worry about. And I'm running a platform, and how do my governance decisions comport with my obligations of a firm and these data governance rules that I need to have around a platform? And I actually think that's where work around platforms, like the most interesting work around platforms, at least from my perspective, is going to go towards this data governance. And I told her at the end of that podcast when I was interviewing her, she had me completely bought in with the fact of privacy is one part of data governance, but it's not all of it. And we need to talk more broadly about data governance.
I think this is a really interesting point because it speaks a lot about, what IS scholarship should be doing. Fully agree there. It's square and center into an area that should be of interest to us. And then in my head, I'm contrasting it to what I know about IS scholarship on privacy. And now this is going to sound dreadful. And I have to say, I don't know much of this research. I don't know many of the researchers. What I will say, what I have seen is really task transaction focused. And the research design is super simplistic. Here's a website design that has that feature, here's the other one that doesn't have it. It's scenario based, like what would you do if this and this and this that happens? And it's sort of, and theoretically you talked about relationships and all this, I don't see any of that sort of stuff. So in a way, and this sounds horrible, I think a lot of that is just child's play. Really
all right. So that's what you say, except for the fact that that's research. It's human computer interaction research. It is privacy research. I think you're unnecessarily dismissing probably some high quality research, right? I don't think we need to dismiss any research to say that there's this opportunity that I don't think anyone's addressing. Right?
Yeah, we need to expand. That's the point I'm making. We need to expand all that repertoire. We need to get more people in.
I think it's in the area that I think we need to expand is exactly what Kirsten said, which is platform ecosystem governance, right? And it's not platform ecosystem governance. Right now, when you look at platform ecosystem governance research, it's all about, how to
control
maybe do
and power.
multi-homing, deal with a multi-sided platform, in the sense of your different stakeholders, how to get the different stakeholders to do things like make contributions or not, right? There's not a lot of kind of where governance meets regulation meets some of these privacy. And I think data privacy is, of course, if data is the new oil, then data privacy is the new private property.
Right.
But it sort of holds for the entire data governance. The same thing. I mean, I think we need to get a couple of different research traditions into privacy and governance. Data governance used to be a thing in the 80s and 90s, where there were people who were doing this, but sort of it got out of vogue and never came back. Now governance is a big issue, but we haven't paid attention to it for 20, 30 years. And the people that used to do data governance and came up with normative models for data governance, they haven't been able to publish anything for 20, 30 years because that's what we were looking for. So I sometimes think like it's our own fault and our own wrongdoing. And I think last time we had you on the show, we talked, I made the same point saying, look, in business schools, privacy wasn't on the curriculum. So we didn't need to hire professors that were skilled on that, which means we had very few. They didn't get any PhD students, which is why we don't have more professors, blah, 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 blah. So, we need to now saying we need to expand that repertoire, because I also think we need someone to come in and do a good flow analysis. We need someone to do a really good observational study of what privacy on the day-to-day in the concrete really looks like, and then all sorts of different theoretical and methodical ways of studying this. We need to expand it, but these people have to come from somewhere, right? So either we make it really attractive, the topic, or we sort of, I don't know, otherwise incentivize people from different traditions that are not normally associated with data privacy would come into this field. And now we lost Nick.
We lost Nick. We can still talk without him. We can just talk about him for a little bit. I think you're right. I think that's I think there is an issue right now, because then it just feeds on itself, right? Because then you don't have editors and reviewers that are there to actually...
Exactly. Yep.
And we had that problem in business ethics specifically for years. And now we have more of like an ongoing conversation around AI and privacy and data, but every discipline is different. And so you almost have to rebuild, and find the reviewers for something. And so it's something that we deal with in management. It's something that we'll deal with in IS, is like, who do we send these papers out to as an editor when I see them, even if I had a scholar that was interested in publishing in this particular journal? Like, can I, as an editor, do I recognize it as a contribution? And then who do I send it out to? That it could, so that there are just some structural issues that come into play. Go ahead.
Sorry, go on. You go on.
No, I was just going to say, I think the other issue that we face, and we talked about this before it started, is why business school professors don't talk about governance as regulation. We kind of stop. So I think there's governance of a platform, as in, like, I'm Amazon. What are my policies internally? Interventions and policies, governance, like that all, I mean that interchangeably. So governance or policies internal. And then I remember I was talking to some European folks that were studying stakeholder theory, and I was at this conference at Darden at UVA, where I studied stakeholder theory as a doctoral student, so I was back. And they were kind of like, why don't you guys talk about, you're too US focused. Why don't you talk about like regulation? And as someone who's kind of gone to like law scholars and, information schools, and they talk about governance and regulation all the time. And I said, it's because in the US as professors, we think we're speaking to top management teams. And so the scope of what we want to contribute is what a firm should do or what a manager should do. And so if it's within their actions as a firm or a manager, then we think that's within our scope to write about, like implications to practice is it.
It's usually implications to managers. Yeah,
exactly. And so we don't think about, like, it's just not normal for us to think about, well, okay, I've stopped, like the firm actually can't do anything about this. This is an industry-wide problem. Or this is actually just like an issue within the marketplace where we have a friction or a problem that we can't handle within our own individual company. But we don't have the tools, we haven't developed it because we don't think about talking to regulators. But I would argue that we are in the best position, because we would say, look, we've exhausted our normal market solutions. There's a problem, we need to have this addressed. And so this is where we could see regulation working, or to help explain to companies why you should do something so you can avoid regulation.
And I think there's two positive aspects of science to be noticed. I mean, one of them is this analogy to tech ethics, right? When we talked about this a year ago, we basically said, look, historically hasn't been in the focus, and there were very few people. Well, I would say by and large, this has really come to the forefront, hasn't it? I mean, there's a lot of people. Also, a lot of people are now studying ethics issues. So in a way, as soon as it becomes a little bit more societally to the forefront of public debate, it does seem that scholars are picking up on it, whether or not business schools and so forth, right? So I think if we see the same thing that we saw in tech ethics and, the ethics of AI and so forth, and how that has been responded to is in the process of being responded to by scholars, left, right, and center, I think that's very promising. If we see the same thing with governments and regulation, that's a good thing. The other thing I would say in IS specifically, it has had a traditional business school focus, where a lot of that was about business value of IT and management of IT and so forth. But for a while now, it has really expanded the scope to look at societal level issues, but also, just anything outside the scope of the firm. Yeah, so there's a lot of people that look at humanistic issues of it. But there's also people that are starting to look at government regulation issues. So it's not anymore the case that, for example, our journals wouldn't find that attractive. So I don't know, you have to tell me whether it's the same in, let's say, business ethics as a field. But in IS, I would say look, there's nothing stopping scholars from researching and writing about, let's say, regulation of IT. Or governance of IT or governance of platforms beyond the what would Amazon do example. In fact, there were a couple of recent issues around regulation IT and IT4 regulation and so forth. So, I guess what I'm saying is you can absolutely publish this within IS. You don't have to go anywhere else. And in the past, it may have not been the case, but it's certainly the case now.
I agree. I just saw a text from Nick that said that his Wi-Fi went out at home, so...
So Nick's gone. Finally, after 15.
Now we can just talk about him. As long as he doesn't produce this before it goes live. I think you're right, though. I think that there is more of an appetite right now. And in the United States, I mean, IS was all over net neutrality when they thought that it was going to be a regulation. So it's not like they're immune or like avoiding talking about regulation, although that was usually like, we don't want that regulation, like that regulation would be bad. So I think that, I think there's like really interesting work that's done when firms have exhausted all their options and what they're dealing with is a problem that's outside of their control. And so they need actually to kind of address and say, this is something that's in society, or this is kind of an issue that we're facing. And we're doing all that I can. And business school professors are kind of perfectly poised to be able to do that.
But let me go back to the argument that I always make. It's sort of like I usually tend to look at the scholarly community that is actively pursuing this. It's sort of like the individuals that are doing this and how they're doing research and what they're writing and so forth, right? And I think similar to ethics and some other fields, it's sort of if you look at what they're doing and how they're doing things, well, that's not fit to reach out to this widened scope. And that's not their fault. I'm not being dismissive of the work that they're doing. I'm just saying that the problem space has widened and deepened and, got more complex. So we need other people that come in with other views, other theories, other methods to complement what they're doing, right? And in a way, like your strategy seems to be that you reach out a lot. Yeah, you mentioned you go to the iSchools, you go to law professors, you go and basically build interdisciplinary teams. Is that fair to say? To cover all these different aspects as they relate to regulation and ethics. Is that the way to go? I mean, just to give you a contrasting example, Brad Greenwood from George Mason, I know that he's getting a law degree because he wants to study, regulation of IT, and he feels that he needs to know more about law. So he's going back to the classroom and studies a law degree. I mean, the question is, how do we expand the scope of what we are able to do as a scholar to move with the problem space as it's shifting and growing and expanding?
So this is a great question, and I actually have an answer for this. So I took a shortcut. Good. I did not get a law degree. One, I married a lawyer, but he does criminal law, so it doesn't really help anybody out, unless he'll just tell you not to murder people. But the second thing I do is I joined the Privacy Law Scholars Conference, and I did that like 10 years ago. I started going, then I started presenting, I started commentating, and now I'm on the program committee and the executive committee. So I'm active in and what I always advise for people is whatever phenomenon you're looking at. For me, it was like privacy and data, is to go outside. Like for me, it was going to a law scholars conference or going to CS and seeing how they're talking about it. Like what issues are they dealing with? How are they dealing? they tend to be a little bit more at the forefront of actually what's going on in the real world than we talk about in business schools. And part of that is just the structure of our journals and how we think about developing questions to ask and answer in research. So theirs is a little bit more phenomenologically driven, where they see something going on with Facebook or Google or Amazon, and then they kind of develop what's wrong with what's going on there. And so I think I have found that very fruitful, because I find out what is going on in another area, and then I bring it back and then talk about it within our theories. And so I really advise people to actually go and immerse yourself with in another conference once a year, and then come back and then stay within your own discipline. But that allows you to kind of learn how they're looking at the same phenomenon in a different way.
But it sounds to me a little bit of what you're saying is they are more hands-on, more relevant, more closer to the practice, a little bit more, that engineering-like mindset. Here's a problem, let's go and solve it. And you also seem to be suggesting what we do in business schools is sort of we're looking at the big abstract theories, and sort of that theory fetish is moving us away from this. And let's assume that's true for a second. It probably is true. Wouldn't that be very difficult of, sort of, let's say I do this, but I still can't bring it in, because I still have to figure out how that relates to the resource-based view of the firm or capability theory, or some other theoretical language that we find interesting at the moment. Like it's nicely said and done, be interdisciplinary, go to the conferences. But what if they're doing things that are not really being valued, and what we are valuing is really on a very different levels of abstraction? And, business schools are not problem solvers in a way.
Yeah, isn't that a funny thing to say, though?
Yeah, I know.
No, we should be. It's kind of, I always say that it's this odd juxtaposition, because within universities, we're seen as being the most practical.
I know,
And so we have this almost, I just from going to different schools. Oh, Nick's coming back. We got to stop talking about him. We better. But so we're seen as the most practical, like the least theoretical. But then in our writings, we're actually so theory focused that we really forms exactly what phenomenon we're going to go after, or what questions we're going to answer. I hear what you're saying. It's not, I just wrote a paper on platform governance that was based on transaction cost economics. You can't get an older theory than that. You know what I mean? Like that, but it's based on like what's going on right now and linking it to what happened with American Airlines and Sabre. So I hear what you're saying, except like almost everything that's going on in the marketplace or in economics it has to be explained by our current theories, or our current theories aren't very good. You know what I mean? Like I actually was almost yelling at business professors on this, not in IS, this was in management, where they said, oh, our theory really doesn't work in big tech. And I was like, how do you say that? Like you can't argue that a theory only works for half the marketplace. It needs to work for all of it. Like that doesn't work, that a theory that works for cars and not social networks, Yeah, exactly. So I think that I still think that it's interesting. You can really see kind of what's going on when you go to those. It also, I have to say, for a writer, it helps me write in a way that's more clear, because I have to not only talk to insiders, I'm trying to talk to like multiple disciplines. So it makes you talk in less jargony way of like, where only an editor and a reviewer would understand. I have to write it so that like a law professor would understand it too. And that's just different than only trying to get my one editor to understand it.
Look, you know, like I'm fully about we need to have a foot in practice, and there's different strategies of doing this. You can go to communities of scholarship that are closer to practice. One of the ways that we do this is typically we go inside the firm, which is a nice thing to do, but it doesn't scale very well. This is really labor and time intensive and so forth. It's another way of trying to stay close to what's really happening on the ground.
No, that's a good point. Yeah. And that's another way to do it.
That's another way to do it. Nick, you're back, and we just talked about your haircut for a while.
My haircut? Oh no, the fact that I don't have hair. Very nice.
But you're back in time to help us wrap things up, because I need to leave soon. I wanted to say one thing, Kirsten. It's related to this discussion, but not really. Like the last time you were on, which is roughly a year ago, you had just about your book was coming out. Your case book, and I wanted to say, like, we ordered exactly. Ethics of Data
I bought the book and I actually read parts of it.
Oh my gosh.
You know what I have to say? All right, so we'll link to it. It's the Ethics of Data and Analytics, but it's like all the major topics you can think of are in this book. Exactly. If I were teaching a class or if I were doing research on the topic, I think this is like the fundamental It's like the base knowledge you need, and then you need to pick a direction and go from there, right? So
That's exactly what I wanted to say, because we bought a couple of copies and we use it already in our teaching.
Oh, good.
And yeah, absolutely. It has. I just wanted to give you a shout out. This is a fantastic book. It has brilliant cases with these beautiful little analysis to the cases.
That's exactly what I wanted it for. What I realized is that, like, if you were interested in just teaching one class on one section, you could just pull that out, have a couple cases that you could use, the front end to explain the theory and what's going on. Like, so there's multiple theories on this. This is how we're going to do it. And then you would have like the background knowledge that you could just take that and do one class on it. And maybe the next semester do 2 classes. Like, but you don't have to teach. You could also use it for an entire course, but the idea is that they're almost standalone and you could just do it as a single class.
That's exactly what I do, right? So I have 2 courses in which I have usually in ethics 2 sessions. And then I'll pick up one of the cases, not the entire book, and use that one, and next one I'm using a different one, and so forth. So this is a wonderful resource.
Oh, thank you very much.
I don't know what you guys talked about when I was gone, but my Wi-Fi is back up now. It's all good. But I have to say, I think this privacy thing is one of the, I don't know, issues of our time that we have to get around. And I had an idea, and Kirsten, we don't have time to talk about it, maybe next time. But Wrecker, you remember last year we gave an award or whatever to
that's a good
paper
idea.
on dignity. Remember? Yeah. And we kind of talked about dignity being the thing everyone can agree to. Whether you're kind of on the left, on the right, religious, not religious, whatever. Dignity is human dignity is something, it's like common ground that's not ideologically tainted yet. And the one thing I love about some of the things that you do, Kirsten, when you talk about ethics is you don't use the word dignity, you use something like dignitarian or something. You have like some legalese for dignity. Dignitary approaches, or I don't know, you have some sort of, when I listen to your podcast, you throw that one around, but I think that that's kind of the key. And I am always afraid of paternalism, right? I think that elites like to be paternalistic, and we should always guard against that we're not babysitting our fellow human on the one hand, but on the other hand, our institutions indeed are taking care of people, right? And I think the thing I'd like to leave this with is what our role is in data privacy. Is right now there are a whole bunch of teenage girls dancing on TikTok, and they're having fun dancing on TikTok. They don't care about their privacy and everything. So whose job is it to care about their privacy and their long-term interests and all of that? Well, it's not the girls dancing on TikTok, right? It's those of us who are setting up the institutions and the ways going forward, and the platforms and the regulations around the platforms. And I think that information systems research is an area that can consider this. And it's not just HCI, right? It's routines, it's processes, it's systems, it's socio-technical systems for and institutions, socio-technical institutions that keep society humming along, right? And I think that's where I don't know of any research that's actually done anything substantial.
And that's exactly what I meant, right? So I came across as dismissive. Probably I didn't mean to. I meant like this problem space is coming to the forefront and it's expanding. It's wide, and it would entertain a whole bunch of different research traditions that we normally wouldn't associate with it. Right? I'm absolutely right. I was thinking immediately of routines and flows and all sorts of relational studies, and bring them in, people. Yeah? And this is not a problem. It's a wonderful opportunity, because if you did this and did this well, you would change the world to the better. You wouldn't just make a firm more profitable. You would literally make this generation of young girls, like I fully agree with that one. That would be a good thing if we did more of this. Yeah. Right. So, and anything we can do there to just get it to the forefront, get it to the attention, get anyone interested and attracted to sound like what I do as a research might just relate to privacy in a way that I haven't even considered this. That's a good thing.
I agree.
All right. That's good.
Kirsten, we'll have you back on again.
Oh, it's so much fun.
Every October. Next time, Nick does most of the talking.
Uh-oh.
I won't pull his Wi-Fi again like I did this time. I just thought he was talking.
I was talking too much. She pulled me. She lives just right behind me.
You guys, you could. What am I doing here? You could just go for a coffee, guys. Just
I know.
Talk to one another. Start talking. All right. Good seeing you both. Thanks for coming on, Kirsten. Bye bye.
Bye bye.